probably.
Yeah, let's do a podcast.
All right. From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, and real therapists. You can submit your questions anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. Excuse me. We're still going through some hard times in the country, but I've learned one thing this week, that we need to approach COVID-19 the same way that Jim approaches Battlefield Earth, relentlessly sticking to your beliefs and not accepting any input from others that provides evidence to the contrary. And now, broadcasting from the churn, that guy is Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangevin. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
Drink your bleach, boys and girls. Don't forget to drink your bleach. Dude,
No,
whenever
don't
Trump
do that.
got up there
Don't
and
do
talked
that.
about injecting bleach, it reminded me of when you and I used to run that program, Dual Success. Do you remember the woman who did drink bleach?
Yeah, I think I don't remember if I was there at that time. But I do remember
Okay, so
hearing
one of
about
our guys did. One of our guys did it, and it was like somebody had bleach in like a vodka bottle, and he saw like this vodka bottle out on the middle of the street.
Oh, well, that's
and
just
so
asking
like
for it.
he went and got it and just immediately like guzzled it, not realizing it was bleach, and so he was a train wreck, like just vomiting everywhere, wanted to die. It was so bad. And it was really funny because here we are like shocked, like, oh my God, this dude just drank bleach. Like, this is so dangerous. We called poison control. Like, we sent him to the hospital. And then this one lady who was just like the weirdest lady, like she had dyed her chihuahua pink. Do you know who I'm talking about, Nick?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, she comes in and we're all like, yeah, this happened. Oh my God. And she goes, yeah, I remember when I drank bleach. And we're like, what? She's like, when I drank my bleach about 1.5 years ago. We're just like, why is this a common thing? Don't drink bleach, people.
Do not.
That's a bad thing.
Do not. Yes. So,
It is highly frowned.
Somebody told me once you could like rinse your mouth and gargle with bleach, and there was some health benefit
What?
to that. I don't know anything about this. I'm just saying what somebody one time
Yeah.
told me.
yeah.
But it sounded... I didn't do it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
I would advise everybody not to do
Didn't
that.
sound like a good idea to me.
No. I mean, when you've got, like,
No.
scope and Listerine, I don't know
Yeah,
why
I've got
you
other things to
do...
rinse. I can just rinse my mouth with water.
Yeah, water would be fine.
Yeah. That,
Water.
That rinses.
Yeah.
Just even a dry toothbrush, I think, would probably be better.
Some people do hydrogen peroxide. They gargle with hydrogen
Oh, yeah,
peroxide.
yeah.
I've
No, I've heard of
Ever
that.
done
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe the person who
That's
told
too
me
scary.
bleach was getting it confused with hydrogen peroxide.
Yeah. Bleach, hydrogen
Yeah,
peroxide.
yeah. Not the same.
Yeah.
Just by the by.
I will barely use like salt water. I can't handle anything. So don't drink bleach, people. That even though I don't know that that's part of our scope, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to go out on a limb and say don't drink bleach. I think that that's probably the right choice. I think we're all going to be okay. Don't drink bleach.
Yeah, don't inject it.
But yeah, weird times, dude. Weird times. I am broadcasting from home again. I am not in the studio because I have a very slight cough. Could just be allergies in the air, but being socially responsible, not bringing my coughing self back into the studio. You're welcome, guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
What?
Is Jacob still there or did he leave?
What? Who's talking?
He's in and out.
Jacob's outside working on his car. He has no idea what's going on anymore. Well, okay, so big thing that I wanted to bring up in the A block.
And I'm ready to joke my way
Nick,
through it.
This is going to be really tough.
This is going to be funny. Get ready. Buckle in for a hilarious A-block, everyone.
It is a rip-roaring fun A block about suicide. Which, before we turned on the mics, turned into a musical medley, a la Jacob. We didn't catch any of that. So, you missed out, but it was very, very creative. So, suicide. Suicide is something I want to talk about because I've been doing like a really deep dive into trying to understand like some of the big suicide data that's been coming out. And it's something that I really think we need to talk about. And it's something that I think you're going to start hearing all of society talk about just because it's so newsworthy. But before this whole thing went down, there was an article that Nick and I had in our A-block stash that we have been planning on talking about for some time. And it was a study that was showing that since the year 2000, over the last 20 years, up to I think it was 2017 is when they had their current data at the time, the suicide rate in America had gone up 40%, which is insane. I mean, 40% increase over 20 years.
Okay, 20 years.
So that was already huge.
Yeah.
What'd you say, Nick?
I was about to ask what the timeline was, but then you clarified it. It's great.
I'm lost. What happened?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Go
Continue.
on.
Okay. So anyway, it was 40%. So it increased 40% over 20 years. That's huge. The other thing that the data was talking about was the groups of people who are the highest risk. And the big thing that it noted was that among blue-collar people, like people with kind of a punch-a-clock job, and they're out in it, that the suicide rate had actually gone up 52% among that particular demographic. And the demographic who is most at risk of suicide are white males who are between their late 30s and late 50s in that age range. And so white males in that age range are by far and away the highest part of the pie of all suicides. I think they make up like 70% of suicides as a whole. And so that data was really interesting, and it was something that was simmering kind of in the background for a while. Nick and I were taking a look at it. At some point, we planned on bringing it out, probably during Mental Health Month, just to talk about the big picture of it. But then this corona thing happened. And one of the things that really caught my ear was I was hearing people that are fighting against the quarantine, and they're saying, we shouldn't be quarantined because this is a mental health issue. There's going to be suicides. And at first it just seemed like a cop-out. It seemed like, oh, that's silly. The death rate is going to go up because of corona. 60,000 people have died of corona. Obviously that's the threat. But it got me thinking, what is the correlation, though? Because there is an argument to be made. So I went back into the data of the Great Recession. And dude, it is unbelievable what you basically see in that data. Because the Great Recession happened over 10 years ago. There's plenty of data on this now. In the Great Recession, the national unemployment rate before the recession was at about 5%. Okay, toward the end of the Bush years, before this huge collapse happens, national unemployment is at about 5%. Okay, it went up to 10% during the Great Recession. So over the course of 2 to 3 years, it's considered 2007 to late 2009. That's whenever it shoots up, and it goes up 5%. So the national unemployment rate was 10%. During that same time, the suicide rate went up 6.1% just during that time. Now think about that. Already this is really discouraging data, that suicide rates have gone up 40% over 20 years. But if you do the math on that, that's like 2% a year. You're talking 18 months, the suicide rate jumps up 6.1%. That was during the Great Recession. In the Great Coronavirus age, the unemployment rate nationally in February, just 2 months ago, was 3.4%. Today, at the end of April, it's over 20% nationally. And in some states, like Nevada, it's going to be much, much higher than that. And so, whenever you bubble all that together, I think that this is something we as a podcast need to be talking about. And I think it's going to be something that the news generally is going to start talking about. We are probably going to see another epidemic of death related to suicide. And this could go up huge. So, yeah, that big picture, though, is with our unemployment currently being at 20% or greater, coming up from just 3% in February, this is a huge risk. And so that data tells us, by some markers, they're predicting that there could be an increase of 0.5% or 1% matching the unemployment rate increase. And that would be in suicide. So this is going to be a really huge crisis. It's something we need to be thinking and talking about.
So I got a question. When you were talking about the Great Recession piece, it going up 5%, how long of a period was it up like that?
How long did it last?
Yeah, because my question is although we've gone up to 20%, if we recover quickly, will that make a difference? I would think that would make a difference. And
there's also a sizable number of that percentage that is currently unemployed that, at least right now, believes that they will go back into being employed.
That's a good point.
Whereas during the Great Recession and the Great Depression and every other big financial downturn, those people have had no immediate prospects of being employed again.
Right, that is a good point.
So right now, I would
that's
be
in the data.
I would be much more devastated emotionally right now if I didn't think that I would go back to a gig once this is all maybe not all over, but at a more manageable point.
Right.
I mean, I would certainly be different emotionally right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's what the data basically said, is that if you look at the Great Recession, there is a window of time where you don't see an immediate spike. And that window is during the shock time, right? We talked about the stages of change or the stages of grieving and how that kind of parallels what it looks like to go through this process in any kind of economic collapse or what's going on. And so there is that period of time where it's like, this might just bounce back. And it could. We don't know what's going to happen. But what's interesting is, and this was a global data that, and I'll actually put it in the episode description if anybody wants to click it, it's extremely in the weeds. It's National Institutes of Mental Health data. It's extremely robust data, so it's not for the faint of heart. But if you're a grad student or you're somebody that actually, has put your hands on data, you might enjoy it. But it's global data. And what their surveys also revealed is that the stronger the unemployment safety net, the stronger the social safety net of a nation, the less that suicide rate will go up. But in America specifically, it did reach 6.1%, which ultimately outpaced the rate of employment. So there was that spike. But if you think about it, the safeties that we had in place during the Great Recession were not the same. Like, the government was not sending everybody checks. The unemployment reimbursement was not kicked up $600, whatever, on the pacing. There were stimulus packages, there was like cash for clunkers to like buy new cars, and
right.
There was like money to like get a down payment on a house. So there was definitely some help, but it wasn't the same. And so like I think that we're seeing a lot of social support right now, which should make a dent in these numbers. But the longer this drags on, and and how long that number becomes more firm, that 20%, 30% becomes real.
Yeah.
And over time, that's when this happens. But it's been like 60 days, since we were at 3%. And so, yeah, it has that flash in the pan kind of feel to it. But the longer that simmers, people lose their savings. They're bleeding out. They can't continue. And that's when these suicide rates are really going to go up. And man, this is super dangerous. I mean, if you're following the data and you're talking 6% during the Great Recession, this thing could bring up our entire suicide rate. Our suicide rate could double, is basically what we're looking at. And that is insanity. Like, it's already the 7th leading cause of death among men. So, like, this is a very serious thing. I think it's something we need to, make sure people are hearing about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that is pretty significant. I mean, going from 3% up to 20%. And I think that it would make a difference if it lasts a lot longer. I think Jacob's right in the sense that, like, it feels a little bit different because we're all kind of under that understanding that, okay, it's going to, we're going to get through this and we're all going to get our same jobs back at the same level of work that we were getting before.
Well, not all.
Well, I know.
But a percentage. Yeah.
I think I still think there's kind of that belief that, okay, it's going to be a couple months, but we're going to get through this. I think the longer it lasts, the more people's beliefs are going to change.
Certainly.
To like, ooh, this is going to take longer, or maybe I'll get a job back, but maybe it's going to be a different job, or
right.
Maybe I'm going to be taking a pay cut because we're not as busy. Like, I think the longer this goes, the more it starts feeding into all these other ideas. And then I could see how that's going to create a lot of anxiety about this. So yeah, I agree. I think this is definitely something that we should look out for as a country.
Yeah. And Jim just mentioned the stat, 7th, suicide is 7th among, would you say white men?
Yeah, well, no, seventh leading cause of death among men.
Among men in general, okay. And then, according to the CDC here, it's the 10th leading cause overall.
Wow.
Overall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's no joke.
Yeah.
I mean, just in 2017, 38,000 people died by suicide in the U.S., and that's just the ones we counted. Mm-hmm. You're not adding in there people who overdosed in basically an act of suicide, but we can't tell because it was drug abuse.
Right.
You're leaving out a lot. Suicide by cop. So like 38,000 people. I mean, 60,000 people have died of corona so far in America. That's obviously the news, and that should be. I mean, that should capture the national attention.
That's a big number.
But 38,000 was in 2017, and that was during a good year. So, I mean, we're going to be looking at maybe double that. And that's insane that we could even be thinking about that, which is why I brought it up. Because especially with May coming up, this is our last show of April. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. It's a month that we usually try a lot to like reach out to podcasts, to news organizations, to anybody we can, and just shake them and say, hey, talk about mental health. Make this a topic in May. Talk about this. It's really important. And, Jacob, I'll challenge you on air, because I will put that on you. You and Matt and Paul, you are in the demographic. So are we. So are Nick and I. But all of us are white guys, in the age range that is at highest risk for this. And a lot of the audience is in that age range and is that demographic too. It needs to be something we're all willing to talk about and spread the news. Here's how you get help. Here's how you can help somebody. This is going to be serious, guys. I think it's going to be a big national thing.
Super young, super attractive guys are in the demographic? Because that's the demographic that I'm in.
Yes, specifically. Yeah, it's specifically.
Crazy young, like 18-year-old.
Specifically with quarantine beards. You are the key demo. So, on that note, we should probably talk a little bit about, what to do. So we're telling you guys as an audience, this is going to be a big deal. And we may be one of the first, kind of people that you're hearing talk about this. You are going to hear more about this in the news. It is going to grow. And it's going to be something that's beginning to be tracked. It's going to be something we need to talk about as a nation. But we want to take a minute to dive into some mental health first aid. And if you want to look it up, you can go to mentalhealthfirstaid.org, and there's a lot of really good articles in there and good techniques and really good information. Never sign up for their training course. It's just highway robbery. They want way too much money, and it's stupid. You don't need that. You listen to Pod Therapy, you'll be fine. But there's definitely
so mental health
some
first aid. Mental health first aid.
Yeah.
If you're looking to sponsor a show, we're open to that.
Yeah, we're cultivating the sponsorship by telling people never to go to your website. Yeah. Go there to learn. Don't give them money. So Nick and I thought that we would jump into just some of those basic questions that you can ask somebody. If there's somebody in your life that is posting some really negative things, they seem really down, they seem really discouraged, or they go silent. They're isolating. You're not hearing from them. My challenge to you, especially in May, and you're going to hear us talk about this a lot in May, is each one reach one. To reach out, to call somebody, to text somebody, to check them, to nudge them, to DM them, and say, hey man, I just wanted to check on you. Do you have a minute to chat? I just want to see how you're doing. It means such a big difference, guys, to reach out to people. And so what we wanted to do was use the mental health first aid kind of formula to unpack for you guys some of the things you might do when you call them. So, Nick, if you want to kick us off, we can start into that direction.
Yeah, so the first one is to assess the risk of suicide or harm. So there's some simple questions that you can ask to really assess if yourself or someone else is at risk for suicide or harming themselves. And the first question then is, are you having thoughts about that? And then also, do you have a plan? Have you decided when and how to do it, or how you're going to do it, right? So that question is kind of getting towards addressing how much thought you've put into this. If you've developed a plan, you're pretty far along the ways. And then the last thing is, do you have everything you need to carry out the plan? So do you have thoughts? Have you developed a plan? How far down that plan have you decided details about that plan as far as when and where? And do you have access? Right. So, for example, if someone is like, yeah, I've kind of had these thoughts about it. If I were to do it, this is how I would do it. Okay. How? And then kind of more detail. I would do it at this time, and this is where I would do it. And then, yes, I've got the access to the means to do it. Then that's pretty high.
Right.
Now, the other thing too, they do mention in this, and we've said this several times before in this podcast for people who have written in asking about suicide. And the point that we always like to drive home and make is that talking about it doesn't create it. That's one of the biggest things I think that people don't want to address. They don't want to ask somebody about how they're feeling because they're like, well, if I ask them if they're suicidal, then I don't want to plant the idea in their head. Maybe they weren't going to do it, but now that I asked about it, now they're going to. That doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of fear of that. Or people are afraid, if you ask somebody, they're going to be offended. And listen, at the end of the day, risk that. I think it's very rare that people are offended. I think if you tell somebody, hey man, you just seem like you're kind of negative lately, or you seem like, things have been really hard. How are you doing? And once you start that conversation, I think that's when you do what the first step that Nick just outlined is. You just ask them, hey, can I ask you? have you been thinking about ending your life? Have you been thinking about death? And that's usually how I ask, and Nick and I have talked before about the risk, and Nick was going over some of those questions, and you've heard us talk about it before. We think about suicide risk as a baseball diamond. First base is, yes, I'm having thoughts of death. Second base is, I know how I would do it. I've included that into my thinking. I've actually thought about how to accomplish this, by what means I would kill myself. Third base is, I have a plan to do it. I think about it. I know how I would do it. I know when I would do it. I know where I would do it. I've thought about carrying that out. Maybe I've even started giving away things or saying goodbyes. And then, of course, on the way toward home base is trying to do it. So as therapists, we start getting involved immediately, but we start calling for help whenever they're on second base heading to third base. That's usually whenever we're like, hey, we need to make sure you're safe. But yeah, always, ask all those questions. Don't just ask, do you have thoughts about death? Be bold and say, hey man, have you ever thought about how to do it? And if they're like, well, I don't know, not really. Okay, great. That means that they're not on second base. And so now you're talking to somebody that's more on first base. The second thing that we want you to do is to listen non-judgmentally. And again, go to mentalhealthfirstaid.org. You can read this for yourself. But listening non-judgmentally means just giving somebody space to express themselves. Sometimes when somebody's depressed, they are quite silent, and sometimes they aren't very, expressive, and they don't give you a lot of words in the conversation. But offering silence and being comfortable with that, asking questions, encouraging them to share and to open up, what you don't realize that you're doing is you're actually allowing them to metabolize that negative energy inside of them. By languaging it, by speaking to a conscious listener, it's causing them to have to evaluate it and to study it inside of themselves. And that's actually therapy. That's what's happening there. And so the way you can facilitate that is to receive their truth in a non-judgmental way. Be patient, be respectful. Don't feel like you need to challenge them when they say yeah, sometimes it just feels hopeless. You don't have to say, but it's not hopeless, Bob. It's all going to get better. Just hang in there. Don't do that. Just kind of receive it and say, yeah, it does kind of feel hopeless sometimes, doesn't it? That's it. And just kind of allow them that space to explore it without feeling like you have to challenge it. If you can be non-judgmental, you'll find that people open up and that it's a very healthy experience for both of you.
Right. And the third thing, giving reassurance and information. So one of the biggest things kind of going along with being non-judgmental is just allowing that person to feel heard, like they have expressed what they needed to express and that it was actually received. So being able to receive that, but then also being able to provide some information as far as, understanding that a lot of suicide comes from mental illness that can be treated, right? So that these thoughts that you're experiencing, it can be normal, right? So you can normalize that. This is a normal thing that happens to a lot of people, but we can address this, right? We can there is a way out of this. And being reassurance, and if you can provide information, provide support, and direct them where to go.
Yeah, and that actually opens up to the fourth point, which is encouraging professional help. Now, here's the thing, guys, and you know this. If you've listened to our show for a long time, one of the things that we often do is explain, hey, if you didn't know how to find a therapist, here's how you find a therapist. And hey, it's okay to talk to a therapist, and you don't have to wait until things are extremely bad. We're really supposed to be sort of the first responder, like you should be beginning this proactively. And what you're going to hear us talking about in May a lot, because it's Mental Health Awareness Month, we are going to be banging this drum, and this is the pressure we're going to be putting on everybody in social media, other podcasts, news organizations, state organizations, national organizations. As much as we have a reach, you're going to hear us bringing that message of saying, it's okay to see a therapist, here's how you do it. And we want everybody to repeat that message, to just put it into the universe. Hey everybody, it's okay to talk to a therapist, here's how you find one. And encouraging somebody that's struggling to find a professional is not condescending, it is not mean-spirited, it is not putting them down, it is showing the appropriate amount of reflection, love, and compassion. that's what you're doing. And remember, as students of our show, you know how to find a therapist. You can go to psychologytoday.com. You can search for a therapist in your area. You can pull out your insurance card and flip it over. On the back side is usually a number that says mental health or behavioral health support. Call that number. Use your insurance benefits. Call your employer. Call your HR. Sometimes you have an employee assistance program. It's called an EAP program. A lot of times those offer free therapy. There's a lot of patients who see me for free through their EAPs. And that's fine. That's great. They are told, hey, you have 8 sessions for free, and then after that there's a copay, and that's great. Go to your employer, look for an EAP, use that insurance, use Psychology Today. Use BetterHelp, for crying out loud. You know, I don't care where you go. Just know that there are those resources. Just Google it. And you know what? Teletherapy is happening right now. I am doing just as much work as I did before the Corona thing. I am just doing it through Zoom now. It's a little bit different. I just wrote a whole blog post about it. I don't know if a lot of people saw it. It's on our website, podtherapy.net. I wrote a whole blog post about why I like Zoom and how I think it's actually been really great for therapy. And I think there's a lot of pros. And I sent that to Lori Gottlieb because she said that Zoom therapy is like therapy with a condom on. And I was like, first off, I always practice safe therapy. So I'm always wearing a condom during therapy just because I care. But anyway, encourage people to find professional help and teach them how to do it. That's the 4th thing.
And the 5th is encourage self-help and other support strategies. So it doesn't have to be just professional help, but any place that they have support. So supportive friends, family members, getting them to contact those individuals. Support from clubs, social groups, churches, or wherever they find support outside on their own. Non-professional help, encourage them to reach out to them as well.
Yeah, and actually this is where I want to just make a statement, and Jacob, I'm aiming this toward you. I'm really proud of you guys in ICS. You know, I see your Facebook group, I see your, Scoop group, I see your I Need Help group, and there's constantly people posting in there, just going through their stuff, and your community wraps around them, man, and I'm just really impressed that you guys created that. That's something I want to see more people do. I want to see, podcasts of that size and bigger creating space inside of their own communities, because that's a legitimate community. That's a legitimate organization of humans that want to talk to each other. So I'm hoping that we see more of that. But guys, if any of you are out there dealing with this, if any of you are feeling low, feeling depressed, feeling hopeless, feeling worthless, not believing in the future anymore, you're feeling financial anxiety, you're feeling financial stress, you're scared about your health, all of this is starting to get into your head. You've got to come back to the truth. And the truth is, this will get better. This will pass. The Great Depression happened, and then it didn't happen. The Great Recession happened, and then it didn't happen. You are going to get through this. And you go back to that post and those episodes we made about grieving, there's going to be a place where you encounter depression, and then you will encounter acceptance if you just hang on. And so we're encouraging each one to reach one during May. Suicide is going to be a huge public health crisis in the weeks and months to come. And so it's something that I definitely want our listeners to feel super equipped in their own lives to help other people with.
Very good. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to discuss wanting to be a therapist. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
Oh, it's a good topic for today. This week's TheraProducer sponsor is David Data Scoop Violon, and today's first trivia question, in honor of TheraProducer Data Scoop, is what is a duel between 3 people called? A duel between 3? I feel like you can't use the word duel. I think it should be a trial. Well, is it called a trial?
It's not called
a
trial. That's the question. What is it called instead if it's 3 people?
I believe it's a gaggle.
A menage a trois.
If you'd like to join David Data Scoop Violon and make the show possible, you can go to patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Again, that's patreon.com/therapy.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our next question is about wanting to be a therapist.
So on the note of this whole dual thing, you need to search in YouTube Key and Peele Mexican Standoff.
Oh, I've seen it.
It is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
That's really good. I've seen that one.
You've seen that? Oh my God. I love it. Jacob, if you haven't seen it, look it up.
Man. I love
Key
and Peele stuff. It's
Mexican
great.
Standoff. It's good. All right, here it is. I want to be a therapist. Hi guys, thank you for being a constant during these unsure times. I feel like everything around me is swirling chaos, but I always have your podcast to look forward to. You're a big part of what initially helped me to get a therapist, and now I'm even going back to school to be one myself. Oh, that's awesome. So here's my question. From your perspective, what are the pros and cons of a PhD or PsyD program versus a master's if I want to work in one-on-one private practice? Any tangible experience and insight is deeply appreciated. Thanks so much and keep up the great work, Anonymous. Yeah, that's a great question.
That was a good question. So for anybody else that is a student or thinking about becoming a therapist, what is that process like, and what are the things that you go to? So he mentioned a couple things here, he or she, I guess, I'm not sure. A PhD/PsyD. So we should probably break that down. There's a difference between a PhD and a PsyD. PhD is a doctorate in philosophy. PsyD is a doctorate in psychology. So you can do one or the other. There are differences between those two. A PhD is going to be a little bit more research focused, whereas a PsyD is going to be a little bit more geared towards doing clinical work. PsyD typically is one less year than a PhD. But if you're really...
It's one more year in the field, I think.
If you're really looking at doing one-on-one private practice, I think the first thing that you should look at before you decide whether a PhD or a PsyD, but really look at, do I even need a PhD or PsyD at all? Or can I just stick with the master's? Because I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions folks have, is believing that you have to have a PhD or any kind of doctorate to do one-on-one therapy, when in reality, the majority of all therapy, psychotherapy that's being done is done by individuals with a master's degree.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually the message that I usually give to students whenever we visit Nevada State College and UNLV and we talk to psychology students in their bachelor's programs. And if they're thinking about becoming a therapist, a lot of them, and it's stunning to me that this is the case, a lot of them have this false belief that you need to go get a doctorate. And like, that's ridiculous. That's not true. And so to the writer, I'll tell you right now, I want you to go get a master's. I don't even want you to think about a PhD. If your desire is to do one-on-one clinical work, the PhD is going to spend most of the time that you're there focusing on research, which means you're going to master a section of the library, you're going to memorize a shelf of the library, and then at the end of your time, you're going to have contributed one piece of information to that library shelf. And that's really interesting. And then toward the end of your work, after 5 to 7 years, you will start getting into clinical work as a student and start doing real work with patients. But you're going to have spent so much time reading papers that didn't necessarily inform your clinical skills. And I just think it's a huge waste of time. And then it also doesn't matter. Like, a lot of people think if you get a PhD, typically, and I guess we have to take this moment to explain. So if you get a medical doctorate and you go to medical school and become a medical doctor, you can then focus on psychiatric mental health and you'll become a psychiatrist, okay? That's just somebody who scripts meds. They don't usually do therapy and usually aren't trained in it either. A psychologist or a clinical psychologist is usually the term for it. That's what we're talking about with that PhD in clinical psychology or a PsyD. Usually they have to come from a school that's APA accredited. That's the American Psychological Association. You always need to look into your state's regulations to see what's required. But a clinical psychologist, yes, they do therapy, but they also do assessments, evaluations, and also a lot of research. So PhD programs, in my opinion, are designed to turn you into a scientist. They're designed to teach you how to do science related to psychology. Master's programs like marriage and family therapy, clinical social work, clinical mental health counseling, those are designed to teach you how to be a therapist, how to do the actual thing. And that's where I want you, because if you're saying you're interested in the one-on-one private practice, that's the road that I'd probably want you to go on. That's a 3-year program. You spend 1 year of that in the field doing the work, and then you get out there and you start helping people during your internship rather than spending 7 years in a library. Like, I just don't think that that's a good path. Unless somebody's really passionate about getting a PhD, I think it's a waste. I don't think it's necessary. I say go for the master's.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what you want to do with it. Because, I mean, I could see somebody wanting to get a PhD or a PsyD. A PhD if you have an interest in one particular mental health issue. Like if you're just really into bipolar disorder and you want to research that, and you feel like researching that is going to make you a better therapist, and you want to do therapy at that point, and you plan on continuing research or staying involved in research after you've got your degree, then maybe that would be useful. But for the most part, I would agree. I think a master's would be useful. The other thing to think about is how much do you enjoy paying student loans? If that's just like the greatest thing ever, and you just love writing that check, then a PhD a PsyD would really, you would enjoy that.
Yeah.
The thing one of the things that I've read about the difference, between a PhD and a PsyD has to do with, how much money you're going to have to borrow and how you pay it back. I mean, you can get a really good education, and if you're smart and you work hard, you can do that with, having to pay not a terrible amount of student loans, but the thing with a PhD program, because it's more research-based, you've got more opportunities for teaching assistantships or research assistantships that will help, that you can get a stipend, that's going to pay for the education. A PsyD, because it's not as research-focused, you don't have as many opportunities for that, so you're going to be paying for that more than you would a PhD. So it could be a little bit more expensive.
Yeah, that's true.
I recommend the School of Hard Knocks.
To be more applicable.
The School of Hard Knocks, definitely.
School of Hard Knocks. Learn on the streets.
Yes. Yeah. Jacob's an instructor there. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah. Jacob's teaching all the courses there. But hey, man, we're super excited that a listener of this show, not only from encountering us, was willing to go do their own personal work with a therapist, but is now inspired to become one. I can think of no higher compliment. So, I mean, that is a wonderful thing to hear. And I hope that you'll teach us about your journey and share with us things that you're learning, and write in about, some of the academic stuff that you start bumping into, or some of the case studies. We love that kind of stuff. We are huge nerds, and we don't get enough of that. So super honest and super great to hear about this, man, and really excited for you in your career. Definitely pursue the masters. And my argument is, get the masters first, get into your career, get good at this job and do it. And then if later on you want to do a doctorate, do that. That's what I did. I did my master's in marriage and family therapy. I got into the clinical work. I, pursued my licenses. I got good at what I do. And then I found a doctoral program that was focused on integrated behavioral health care, which is kind of like what happens whenever you mix mental health with physical health in an outpatient clinic. And so that's kind of what the study apparatus was about. It was a 4-year program, and you had to have your master's, and you had to be a licensed therapist in order to even go through it. So that was smart, because it was like designed to meet me where I was at, rather than like having me restart and like go sit in a library and memorize a bunch of research that won't matter. There's lots of programs that are developing that kind of follow that model. So I would say pursue the master's, and if later on you want to add a doctorate because you're interested in it or whatever, do that. But yeah, God, student loans. I don't even want to talk about it. We're talking about suicide and depression. I shouldn't be talking about my student loans. That ain't going to help.
Exactly. All right. Well, right back. Keep us updated. Let us know how that goes.
Yep.
All right. Well, we're going to take our next break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about hypnotherapy. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
Oh, hypnotherapy. This week's other THERAPRODUCER sponsor is Judy Schneider. Today's second trivia question, in honor of THERAPRODUCER Judy, is: what was the first toy advertiser on television? What was the first toy advertiser on television? Toy advertiser. Okay. If you'd like to join Judy Schneider and make this show possible, you can go to patreon.com/therapy and sign up. Again, that's patreon.com/therapy.
All right, we are back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our next question is about hypnotherapy.
I'm interested in looking up the answer to that. If I had to bet, I'm going to say it's probably like Mattel. I think it's probably
No,
Mattel.
it's the first.
I feel like that's
you kind of misread it. It's the first toy to advertise on TV.
Oh, not the brand.
Yeah,
the
first actual toy advertised on TV.
Oh, wow.
Lawn darts.
Oh, wow, the very first toy.
No.
Huh.
Good guess, but no.
Interesting. I'll have to look it up. All right. This one says, note about COVID-19.
Not.
In these strange times...
That says not.
Not about COVID-19. Oh, okay. Even better. In these strange times, I've been doing a lot of guilty pleasure reading to avoid the news at every turn. My guilty pleasure, alien abduction books. Did Paul send this?
No.
Is this from Paul? My guilty pleasure, alien abduction books. Which brings me to my question. Is there any legitimate use for hypnosis in therapy? Oh, okay. Alien abduction focuses on regression hypnosis, but even broader than that, weight loss, quitting smoking, using hypnosis for things like that. Is there any science behind this? And if so, what? Patreon idea. Sit down with Paul Mattingly for a little alien YouTube deep dive and chill, and comment on all the horrible psychology. Disgruntled pilot scoop. Okay, it wasn't from Paul.
Before you guys dig into it, I want to say I've never studied hypnosis or anything like that. All of my experience in hypnosis is from doing shows like hypnotist shows.
Okay.
And I will tell you that all of that is bullshit. All of that is 100% the person on stage playing along with the hypnotist. They may be a plant, or they may just be a regular audience member who's genuinely being called up on stage, but they are not genuinely like being put into a trance and then being forced to do something.
Right. This would be a good one for you to chime in on. I'm interested.
I have chimed. Consider me chimed.
Ding. All right. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a really, really complicated deep dive into like the actual science of hypnosis and like what we're actually talking about here. And I guess it's one of those things that's really tricky. So hypnosis, the fundamental concept, and actually what's interesting, there's even the interest of the word is really fascinating. So like a lot of people use that word mesmerizing, like something is mesmerizing. That's actually a reference to a person. His name was Franz Mesmer, and mesmerizing is hypnosis. It was one of the early techniques of hypnosis that he would use, and it had to do with magnetic force, and kind of eliciting animal magnetism or whatever. And he was trying to basically dial into the subconscious. So if you agree with Freud, right, that there's this conscious top layer and then a subconscious bottom layer, hypnosis followed that line of thinking and said, so like, is there a way to just dial directly into that subconscious and sort of deal with that rather than like talking to the conscious side? And so this was explored with a lot of people, and I think that the brightest light in modern hypnosis as a science was probably Milton Erickson. And so Milton Erickson is considered the father of American hypnosis. But it's interesting because while that was his first act in his career to kind of popularize hypnosis, and he would do public demonstrations, and it was a very interesting skill that he would use, he didn't like make people quack like a duck. He used it for therapeutic purposes. And so he would induce a trance, which a lot of you guys have heard about. It's like people think about it as like waving the object in front of you. That's not necessary. Inducing a trance is a real thing. That's not mythological. The stuff on stage is mythological. A trance is a real thing. And you've experienced it. All of you have experienced it. A trance state happens, and it's kind of the slip space between conscious thought. If you've ever felt like detached, like from the moment, like you're staring at a TV screen, and then all of a sudden you blank, and you're like, what am I even watching?
Or I got it.
Like I just was in my own
I have
thoughts.
another example.
That's a trance.
Jim. Another example of this, I think, has happened to a lot of people where you get in your car and you're just driving and you're focusing on the road, and then all of a sudden time goes by and you're like, oh, I'm almost to my destination. I don't remember the last 15 minutes. I don't remember making that turn. I don't remember doing this. That's kind of more along what the lines of what we're talking about are.
That's a trance state.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so a trance state is this passive place where you're not consciously engaging your reality, but you're still able to function. So hypnosis played with that idea and said, okay, is there a way to summon that state in a participant so that you can kind of plant concepts and speak with honesty about some of their experiences and kind of step around their ego? Step around their conscious defenses that kind of want to grapple with you. And so that's what Erickson was very much demonstrating. Hypnosis in that sense works. It does work, but it doesn't like make you quack like a duck. It's more like this way to get past a person's guard so that you can access more honesty from them and access more willingness and more motivation. But what's interesting is that Milton Erickson, again, the founding father of American hypnosis, he ultimately abandoned the strategy. And this was after he was considered the god of this topic, which, again, he's one of my most, like, I really like him. Like, as a researcher, as a clinician, he's just an amazing personal figure. But it's so interesting because he went on to found other techniques, like postmodern techniques, solution-focused brief therapy, narrative therapy. These were things that came out of his skill set. And his argument was, it isn't necessary to induce a trance to get the results of hypnosis. At some point, he realized inducing a trance was actually too slow. Like, he didn't need to do that. And so he invented motivational interviewing. And, like, basically, like, using partnering skills with the participant to ultimately get the results that you're looking for without having to induce a trance. So fast forward to present day. Hypnotherapy is an unregulated discipline almost everywhere. So there's usually a law in your state that has a rule about calling yourself a hypnotist, but then also no rules about hypnotherapy. And it's very interesting because, like, you have to register as a hypnotist if you're going to, like, do stage presentations or something like that. And basically the guidelines are, in no way, shape, or form should you actually be trying to do the actual clinical skill called hypnosis. It's just a magic show. It's just for fun.
Right.
And these people are completely participating just for fun, just to get through it. But clinical hypnosis, there are hypnotherapists that do work in Las Vegas. I've met a few of them. I think it's overhyped. I think it's definitely overhyped, and people believe it as this concept of, like, you can, you know, overcome something or, like, access superhuman abilities or whatever, and you don't have to do the hard work of, like, humanly grappling with yourself, that somebody could just, like, jump in there and recode you with hypnosis, and, like, you'll wake up in a daze and it's like having surgery for your mind. That is not in any way, shape, or form what it is. It essentially resembles regular therapy, except the participant is more so induced into a trance state, which means the dynamic of the dialogue is different and the participation is different. And I do think that I've had people tell me it gets some results. I've had people, you know, tell me that there's a lot to it, which is fine. I do know some, you know, mainstream therapists that will bring in hypnotic things, you know, to be part of the session, and there's some really cool skills you can do with it. By and large, though, guys, I would say it's not necessary. I don't think it's actually very helpful. And I think, like, just like with Milton Erickson, there's more effective ways to get the results without having to induce a trance.
Right. And actually, I think one of those ways that is going to, has already caught on, but is going to continue to catch on and probably will affect hypnotherapy is mindfulness meditation. Because essentially,
Yes.
you're basically, you teach the person, the patient, to develop these skills and to practice these skills, and it's almost kind of like they're doing it themselves. Whereas hypnotherapy requires a hypnotherapist, it kind of puts the control on the clinician and not on the patient. Whereas mindfulness meditation really can accomplish, I think, the same thing for the most part. Only it's you, the individual, that is in control of you. So I think it's far more beneficial in that sense.
Yeah, and that's actually what Erickson talked about. You see, hypnosis only works in a voluntary state. You cannot force hypnosis onto a person. All that stuff is not true. So you can't, like, click your fingers and all of a sudden, you know, people magically enter that state. It is something that they have to want to do. It is something they must willingly do, or the entire concept doesn't work. And this is one of the reasons Erickson stopped doing it, because he realized as he's sitting down to do this work with somebody, they are fully giving themselves to this process. They are highly motivated. They're in an action stage of change. They are completely ready to do therapy. And so he didn't need hypnosis because he didn't need to step around their conscious safeguards and access deeper truth because they were totally willing to provide that. You could just ask. And so, like, it was fine. He didn't need to do it. And this is where actually motivational interviewing came in, as sort of a way to elicit a buy-in from your patient so that you can do the work that you're there to do. So now the second question that the writer talked about is the alien abduction thing. And this is an interesting point. So in kind of recent legal history, there were these situations where a person would go see a hypnotherapist, and the goal was, if they have bad memories of maybe sexual abuse or something bad from their past, perhaps the hypnotherapist can basically help them get around that block and remember the memory. this became really problematic because essentially you're going to see these people who are, again, usually not highly, licensed people, and then they're helping you achieve a regressed memory or whatever. And so then you'd bring that out, and then they would use it in court and be like, oh, this person, once testified that nothing ever happened. Then they went and saw this person. They now recall this entire event, and now you have people being accused of like rape, and like you have things like really serious charges that were being thrown out. And this also parallels the alien abduction thing, where people are like not sure if something happened that night in the desert. They don't remember much, and they're like, that's weird. I feel like I don't remember much. And so they go see a hypnotherapist, and they're like, oh, we dug out my memory. They unlocked the safe, and here's what happened. It's extremely problematic because the research that I've seen basically has demonstrated the hypnotherapist has to use leading intentions in order to achieve hypnotherapy. They have to lead you. It is not an unbiased blank slate process. You are being induced into a trance, and there is guidance. It is considered a directive therapy, which means it's not passive. I'm driving the car as the therapist. And so in hypnosis or hypnotic induction, there is a driving pattern where the person is asking you, and what was the what color shoes was the person wearing when they were beating you? Well, the implication is they were beating you. So now you're recalling a mental image that's being colored by my voice. My voice, my descriptions, the language I'm using to help you is ultimately placing concepts and ideas and figures into your memory, and we're accessing memory. The same trick is used in a healthy way whenever we're dealing with trauma. The way that you help people resolve trauma is you re-access the memory, and then you intentionally screw with that memory so that the brain recodes it differently than originally happened. And what you're kind of doing is planting false memories you're kind of overwriting the old memory file of the trauma. In hypnotic induction, the same thing's happening, except they're just coming up with complete nonsense and just giving that to you. And so people are their creative mind is filling in that void with things they've seen from movies, things they've heard from other people. The hypnotist is directing it. So it's extremely unreliable. It's no longer court admissible. It's been debunked. And at the end of the day, if somebody's been abducted by an alien and the aliens have the technology to travel through, space and time to get here, they definitely have the ability to make it so that you never remember meeting them. And I'm pretty sure some guy who went through a certificate course in hypnosis, online is not going to be the dude who digs that memory out of you.
Now, also, just to be clear, the part that you said about, dealing with trauma, it's not necessarily the therapist that is recoding the trauma. It's more like the patient is recoding it through the interaction with the therapist. So like if you're doing like a narrative therapy, you're allowing the patient to recode that information themselves so that they can process it. Right.
Yeah, so like here's an example. Like in order to do PTSD work, you are as a therapist, I wouldn't go so far as to say that I'm inducing a trance, because I agree with Erickson, that's not necessary. Instead, you are asking them to go into something of a trance state. They don't realize that's what you're doing, but you're asking them to go back and revisit the memory, and you're asking these very direct questions. So like here's an example of a subtle way that I might change or recode a memory. Let's say the person's in a Bank of America, and somebody comes crashing in with an assault rifle, everybody get on the ground, screaming, they're to rob the bank. When I'm asking the person to retell that story, they're telling me how they felt so scared, how they wish they would have tackled that person with the gun. They wish they would have done something, but they froze. They couldn't do it. And as they're telling me that, I might say, wow, that sounds like it was really scary. How did you manage to survive that situation? Now I'm asking a question, and they're going to respond to it by telling me, oh, well, I got on the floor and I hid under a desk. But notice how I've reframed what we're talking about. We're no longer talking about how you cowardly hid. We're talking about, how did you manage to survive such a scary situation? Survival sounds like a task. So I'm subtly changing the way you're about to tell that story as you're telling me that story, which is going to influence the way the trauma holds in your memory. So that's like a very small example of like how you're essentially doing hypnotic injunction in trauma work. And Nick's right. I'm not overwriting it myself and retelling a story. I'm assisting you in re-narrating it in a way that's going to relieve the symptoms that you're experiencing.
Right. I mean, as far as the hypnosis, now the next part of this question was dealing with weight loss or smoking cessation, right? So one of the things in this Psychology Today article on hypnosis, it basically defines it. It says, simply put, hypnosis is a state of highly focused attention or concentration. So if the highly focused attention or concentration helps somebody deal with, their thought process around weight loss, or they're dealing with cravings when talking about smoking cessation, then that's great. So in that sense, that's probably helpful. But again, I don't think that's the only way to achieve highly focused attention or concentration. Like I said before, mindfulness meditation, I think, can also achieve that. So it's not to say that if you do any kind of hypnotherapy to address weight loss or smoking cessation, that's all complete BS. I think the way that it's pictured, like we imagine, like, I'm going to completely zone out, fall asleep, and then the hypnotherapist is going to say something, and all of a sudden, I no longer ever have a desire to smoke. That's not actually what it is, and that, I think, would be absolutely crazy to believe, in a sense. That's just not. It doesn't. That's not how it works. It's really highly focused attention concentration is a simple way to put it.
It's always seemed to me that when people say that hypnotherapy works, it sounds a lot like meditation to me.
Yes, exactly.
It's just, I'm sitting here, I'm pondering it to myself, I'm thinking about it, I'm really focusing on that issue, and I'm just doing it in a different way.
Yes.
But that's in essence what you're doing, and somebody is sitting there with you, also focusing on that issue, and that might help.
Yeah.
If you're trying to quit smoking, if you just sit there with somebody for a while and that person is saying things to you like, hey, you really want to quit smoking. Smoking is bad for your health. People don't like to be around you when you smoke. Your friends don't like to be around you when you smoke. It makes you smell bad. It costs money. Somebody pointing out all the negatives that you have told to that person and they're just parroting them back to you. That's not going to hurt the process.
Right. And I think a big part of it is like when you get to that focused attention and relaxation, you are less likely to fight information that comes in, right? Yeah. So you're more suggestible and you're willing to kind of accept like, okay, this is what's happening. Oh, yes, that's happening. You're not fighting information that's coming in. So I think that's the benefit of it. But again, like Jacob said, I think, it's really meditation is in a sense.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, because hypnotherapists will tell you one of their treatment goals for their patient is to teach the patient self-hypnosis. And so it's interesting because that kind of mimics what you think of psychotherapy as. We're not here to have all the secrets and not reveal them to you. We're here to train you in the secrets so that you can take them home. You're taking home skills. And hypnotherapists do the same thing. They want you to self-hypnotize, which is essentially mindfulness, on your own, because it's helpful. It does work. It does work for things like weight loss. I think it's very helpful for addiction work. I think it's very helpful for smoking cessation. I think it's very helpful for performance anxiety, because we're teaching you how to move your brain into a different state when you're feeling triggered or when you're feeling overwhelmed so you can get your results.
Yeah, right.
And ultimately, we're teaching you how to do that. You can call that hypnosis if you want, but it's effective. So if anybody's out there and you've thought about doing it, hey, at the end of the day, you know that we are pro all mental health. If you're going to a hypnotherapist so you can find out if you were abducted by aliens, I'm less enthusiastic about your results. I don't think you could trust your results.
All right. That was a great question. In regards to the sit down with Paul, last week we woke Paul up to ask him his opinion on Battlefield Earth, so we might be on his shit list, so I wouldn't count on that happening.
Oh, we are. Did you see his tweet?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, we are on his shit list. He tweeted something like, it was like it was some kind of meme or something like that, but somebody calling at 2 p.m. and him being like horrified, like people are trying to sleep, and everybody immediately commented and was like, yeah, Jim and Nick just did that. And I was like, God damn it was Jacob. We didn't do that. We don't have his number. Jacob did that.
It was Jim. It was Jim.
All right. Well, we've
just another casualty of Jim trying to like shitty movies.
Yeah. It's how many more people, Jim, have to be affected by your terrible decisions and your terrible choice in movies?
Yeah. You're right. It's on me.
All right. Well, we've come to the end of this episode just in time because my phone's about to die. Battery's running low. So, any apologies or Patreon reviews or announcements?
Nope. I guess I apologize for offering up the idea that we should swerve our planet into an asteroid. That's probably not part of the solution. That's probably not good. I have no apologies for continuing to advocate for fine cinema, and I hope that other people will see the light. Definitely do want to take a moment to, again, acknowledge David Datascoop Violon. David has been with us from the beginning, has always been a supporter of our show. He shows up everywhere we show up. It's so funny. You know, we'll go to events, we'll go to Penn things, you know, we'll go to ICS things, and there's David. It's always great to see him. And he's just been a huge friend of the show for us and has been a long-time supporter. And David, we are just so grateful for all of this time that you've spent with us. He's going to stay on as a supporter, but he's making room at the TheraProducer table for a little while, and that's awesome. And Ellie O'Dare has stepped into that light, and as an ex officio board member, she is going to become an official TheraProducer in May. I've already let her know that she should probably be thinking about like ads and like what she wants to do, and she's already let me know where I can stick it. So it looks like we're going to continue to just make up ads.
Excellent.
Nobody sends us anything.
Excellent.
That's fine. That's fine.
All right.
They do what they want. They're the producers. They can do whatever they want. But David, thank you
Yes,
so much,
thank you,
man.
David.
Thank you for being our Patreon. Thank you for being our supporter. Thank you for being our friend. And, you know, we're still with you and grateful you're still with us. But we definitely want to take a moment just to reflect on the journey we've had with you and just how grateful we've been for your contributions and the journey we still have ahead, brother. We're still trucking, and so are you. So grateful to have you, man. Thank you for sticking with us.
Yep, thank you. And new THERAPAL this week, Coffee Maple Scoop. Thanks for joining.
Oh, yeah. That's exciting. I like that one. I like coffee maple. Have you ever had the coffee maple donut?
Yes, I have.
That's
very good.
Probably the best donut.
That's good content, Jim.
That was the
Good,
best.
yeah. That's why people tune in.
Yeah.
Jim ate a donut, everyone.
We'd also like to thank our bosses, the Elite Eight, the mysterious and shrouded Illuminati members of the fan club, the TheraProducers. Thank you, Smitty Scoop, Jake Schneider, Robert Brownie Jr. Mint, Kayla Lansbury, David Datascoop Violon, Judy Schneider, Nathan's Hot Dog Scoop, Dr. Ben Dawn, and ex officio board members as of right now, Ellie O'Dare and Crazy Manana Scoop. If you'd like to hear this episode uncut and unedited and enjoy our spontaneous side projects, you can go to www.patreon.com/therapy, and thank you for supporting mental health. That's all the time that we've got for this week's session. We want to thank our landlords, the Ice Cream Social Podcast, and thanks to those of you who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Share this episode with someone who needs it by opening this episode's description in your podcast app and copying and pasting the link provided into your social media. Don't forget, you can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy, on Twitter at PodTherapyGuys, and at patreon.com/therapy.
If you want to submit a question to the show, ask anonymously at podtherapy.net or email us at podtherapyguys@gmail.com. I'm Nick Tanchman.
I'm Franz Besmer.
Thanks, and we'll see you for your appointment next week.